All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, our guest will be Axel von Trotzenberg, the Senior Managing Director for Partnerships and Development Policy for the World Bank Group. He will join us shortly to provide an update on the World Bank Group's evolution, as well as highlight the impacts of the group's International Development Association, known as IDA 21, replenishment. And tomorrow, we will be joined here by Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, and he will brief you on the situation in Gaza. The Secretary General has just arrived in Beirut for a solidarity visit to Lebanon. Upon his arrival, he will be meeting with the Lebanese Minister of Foreign Affairs and Immigrants, Abdallah Bou Habib. Tomorrow, Friday, the Secretary General will head to Naqoura in the south, where he will visit the UN peacekeeping force. On Saturday, he will be meeting with the political leadership in the country. And just to note that the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Türk, is concluding his visit to Lebanon today. In a press conference, he said that in his discussions with the new president, Joseph Aoun, and Prime Minister-designate Nawaf Salam, he offered his office's assistance in support of their commitments on the key reforms needed to strengthen the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary. And we have more travel for you. The Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, will arrive in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, later today, where she will convene a retreat with executive secretaries of the regional economic commissions. The retreat, which will continue until Sunday, will focus on accelerating efforts to deliver on the 2030 agenda and implementation of the Pact of the Future. While in Ethiopia, the Deputy Secretary General will also meet with senior government officials to discuss the UN-Ethiopia relationship and regional cooperation for peace. Ms. Mohammed will return to New York on Monday, the 20th of January. As you saw yesterday, the Secretary General welcomed the announcement of a deal to secure a ceasefire and hostage release in Gaza. He called on all relevant parties to uphold their commitments and ensure that this deal is fully implemented. The Secretary General said that our priority must be to ease the tremendous suffering caused by this conflict. The United Nations stands ready to support the implementation of this deal and scale up the delivery of sustained humanitarian relief to the countless Palestinians who continue to suffer. It is imperative that the ceasefire removes the significant security and political obstacles to delivering aid across Gaza so that we can support a major increase in urgent, life-saving humanitarian support. The humanitarian situation is at catastrophic levels. The Secretary General calls on all parties to facilitate the rapid, unhindered, and safe humanitarian relief for all civilians in need. From our side, we will do whatever is humanly possible, aware of the serious challenges and constraints that we will be facing. We expect our efforts to be matched by other humanitarian actors, the private sector, and bilateral initiatives. And he urged the parties and all relevant partners to seize this opportunity to establish a credible political path to a better future for Palestinians, Israelis, and the broader region. The full statement is online. Meanwhile, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, said that in preparation for the ceasefire, humanitarian agencies have been mobilizing supplies to scale up aid delivery across the Strip. Mr. Fletcher urged all parties to adhere fully to international humanitarian law. This means protecting civilians and civilian infrastructure, allowing aid workers safe, unfettered access to people in need, whoever and wherever they are, and removing all obstacles to the entry of essential aid. It will also be critical to enable entry of commercial supplies. Mr. Fletcher urged the Security Council to use its collective voice and weight to insist the ceasefire is sustained, international law is respected, and that obstacles to saving lives are removed. Meanwhile, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs continues to receive reports of Palestinians killed due to the ongoing bombardment of Gaza. Yesterday, the World Health Organization and its partners facilitated the medical evacuation of 12 patients and nearly 36 companions from the Strip. Most are suffering from cancer and immunological disorders, and they'll now receive treatment in Albania, France, Norway, and Romania. WHO stressed that as the ceasefire takes hold, it is urgent that more countries step forward to receive additional patients for specialized treatment. More than 12,000 people are awaiting medical evacuation outside Gaza, where, as you know, the health system has been shattered by more than 15 months of conflict. Meanwhile, the World Food Programme said it has 80,000 tons of food waiting outside Gaza or on its way in, enough to feed more than 1 million people. WFP noted that while the ceasefire brings hope, we need unrestricted movement of humanitarian teams and supplies to reach those in need. And the UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, reported today that more than 1,070 UNRWA health staff continue to work in health centers, temporary clinics, and medical points across Gaza, providing more than 16,000 health consultations in a day. The agency's medical teams are also ensuring specialized support for patients. On the 11th of January alone, they provided care for nearly 1,100 pregnant and postnatal women at high risk, dental and oral health services for almost 600 patients, and physiotherapy for more than 300 patients. Turning to Syria, this afternoon, 18 trucks carrying food for over 40,000 people from the World Food Program crossed through the Bab al-Salam border crossing from Turkey to northern Aleppo. Also today, OCHA completed a cross-border mission to Azaz in northern Aleppo to assess 2 displacement camps hosting more than 500 families living in tents. Our partners have provided food assistance to the camps. However, the aid has been significantly reduced last year due to underfunding. People have told us that they want to return to their homes, but are unable to, as their villages have been destroyed in past hostilities. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that some parts of Aleppo Governorate continue to face hostilities, including in the vicinity of Tishreen Dam, as well as challenging humanitarian access. In the city of Manbij in northern Aleppo, humanitarian access remains constrained as NGOs operating in the region continue to face restrictions. OCHA reports a dire need for fuel, flour, and staffing following a joint assessment mission to Manbij with WFP last Thursday. Most essential services, including electricity, waste management, health, and bakeries, are non-functional. Our education partners also report that 350 schools remain closed in the city and rural areas, impacting more than 125,000 students and 3,500 teachers. Turning to Yemen, we and our partners yesterday launched the 2025 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan for the country, where 19.5 million people need vital aid and protection. This is an increase of 1.3 million people compared to last year. This year's plan seeks $2.5 billion to provide 10.5 million of the most vulnerable people with life-saving assistance, including food, clean water, and healthcare. The humanitarian and resident coordinator in Yemen, Julian Harnes, said that humanitarian action has been effective in alleviating the worst impacts of the country's crisis. But he stressed that we cannot do this alone, and much more is needed to reduce needs, achieve peace, revive the economy, and build the resilience of communities. In 2024, donors provided $1.4 billion to the Yemen Humanitarian Appeal, enabling some 200 aid agencies, 2/3 of them local Yemeni organizations, to reach more than 8 million people. Turning to Ukraine, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, together with the government of Ukraine, today in Kiev launched the Humanitarian Aid and Refugee Response Plans for 2025. They appealed for $3.3 billion to support 8.2 million people affected by the crisis within the country and across its borders. Mr. Fletcher paid tribute to the humanitarian workers in Ukraine, calling them heroes who work under pressure and in dire conditions. Our humanitarian colleagues note that some 600 of our partner organizations, more than 2/3 of them Ukrainian, work tirelessly to deliver critical aid to millions of people. Mr. Fletcher pointed out that relentless attacks against energy systems, homes, and other civilian infrastructure have rendered many hospitals inoperable, reduced people's access to their livelihoods, deprived people of heat and water during the winter, and hindered children's access to education. For his part, Mr. Grandi said that countries hosting Ukrainian refugees abroad have done incredible work over the last 3 years to provide safety and a sense of normalcy to support these refugees in restarting their lives in their new communities, all the while hoping for conditions to change in Ukraine to allow them to go home. We must continue to sustain this hope, he noted. As the world enters 2025 and Ukraine is approaching a 4th year of full-scale war, Mr. Fletcher and Mr. Grandi said the people of Ukraine, both at home and abroad, need the world to stay the course with them to rebuild their lives and preserve hope for a better future. And just to flag that this afternoon, the Security Council will hold a briefing on the maintenance of peace and security of Ukraine. Rosemary DiCarlo, our Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, is expected to brief Council members. Turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, our colleagues from the Joint Human Rights Office there tell us that 2 years after the start of an intercommunal conflict in the Chopo province, cohabitation remains difficult between the communities involved, the Mbole and Lengola. This, they say, could pose a major risk to the province's stability. In a report published today, the Human Rights Joint Office says that at least 300 civilians have been victims of serious human rights violations and abuses in this intercommunal conflict since February 2023. They have established that violations and abuses, such as summary executions, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, sexual violence, abductions, and the systematic looting and destruction of property in villages have been committed by all parties to the conflict. According to government and humanitarian sources, at least 107,000 people have been displaced and are living in precarious conditions in 3 sites, in the town of Kisangani and in the municipality of Lubunga. More information online. The UN mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, is deeply concerned by reports of clashes between armed forces in Western Equatoria, which have resulted in civilian casualties and displacement. UNMISS calls for intervention from the highest levels of government to prevent further deterioration of the security situation. The special representative of the Secretary General and head of UNMISS, Nicholas Haysom, said that this incident also highlights the need to urgently progress the development of necessary unified forces across the country. In a statement issued today, the special representative of the Secretary General and head of the UN mission in Kosovo, Carolyn Ziadeh, expressed concern about the actions against Serbia-funded institutions across Kosovo yesterday. The mission notes that the actions resulted in the closure of several institutions, including post offices, provisional institutions buildings, and social welfare centers. Ms. Ziadeh is concerned about the impact of these closures on the daily lives of individuals, especially those from non-majority communities who directly depend on these institutions. She stressed that such unilateral actions risk further erosion of trust between communities and Kosovo authorities. There's more in a press release. And in China, the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, is providing urgently needed emergency relief supplies for children and families affected by the earthquake that struck Dingri County of the Tibet Autonomous Region of China last week. This follows a request from the local government. At least 126 people have been confirmed dead and 188 others injured, with over 30,000 people relocated to temporary settlements. In the 2 counties where UNICEF is providing support, over 10,000 children below the age of 7 have been affected. They're in a mountainous region where nighttime temperatures can drop to negative 17 degrees Celsius. UNICEF is delivering 40 tons of supplies for newborns, young children, and pregnant women in the affected areas. This includes thousands of diapers for babies and toddlers, warm winter clothes for children below the age of 7, and quilts and winter jackets for pregnant women. The first batch of supplies arrived yesterday. UNICEF is also working with local partners to provide longer-term psychosocial support to affected children. And last, we would like to say thank you to Armenia and Iceland for their full payments to the regular budget. This brings the number of member states on the honor roll to 10. All right, Edie.
Thank you, Farhan. Did the Secretary General meet with Volker Türk in Beirut before he departed?
The Secretary General just touched down over the last hour, so I don't really know whether they had any real intersection. I believe Mr. Türk is on his way out. If he stays on a little bit longer, they could meet, but their time in the country together is short.
And could you give us an update on what Sigrid Kaag is doing and some more specific details on exactly what preparations are ready to go as soon as the ceasefire starts?
Well, Sigrid Kaag earlier this week was in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Ramallah talking to Israeli and Palestinian officials. We gave you a rundown of the particular officials she met with, but she was coordinating in the event that there was a ceasefire so that there could be some preparations. Right now, Mohammed Hadi, the Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, who's the humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, is in Cairo, and he's also participating in a coordination effort. So we're trying to get goods lined up. We're trying to see what can be done. Now, we're going to try to deliver as much aid as possible, and we're going to coordinate with non-governmental organizations, with parties on the ground. But the important thing to bear in mind is that we can only deliver as much as the conditions on the ground will allow. So that means that we will need the various impediments to our aid deliveries to be removed. And those include the restrictions on the entry of goods, the lack of safety and security, the breakdown of law and order, and the lack of fuel. So those all need to be addressed. Tony. Sorry. Yeah, one more.
Sorry, Farhan. Is there any update at all on efforts to ensure security for the delivery of aid?
We're certainly in talks and trying to see what can be done to make sure that security can be improved. But at this stage, it's an ongoing process. We need to make sure that we will be able to not just get aid in, but get it to the people in need safely. Tony and then Amelie.
Thank you, Farhan. Israeli media reported today that Israel and the United States are holding talks on a possible alternative to replace UNRWA before Israeli laws banning UNRWA's work go into effect, of course, at the end of the month. Is the SG aware of these talks? Is the UN part of these talks?
We're aware of these reports. Obviously, we have maintained our position that the UN Relief and Works Agency is irreplaceable. It is the backbone of our operations. There are certain things, such as UNRWA's shelter, its large presence on the ground, the medical clinics it operates, the educational support it provides, that cannot be replicated easily. Of course, like I mentioned at the start of this briefing, you'll be able to hear from Philippe Lazzarini tomorrow. He'll be the guest at tomorrow's noon briefing.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. Do you have any idea about what kind of arrangements the UN would be able to accept in terms of like replacement if it's happening? Because like the report also talking about coordination with other UN agencies. Would that be something that the UN envisages?
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Right now, what we're concentrating on is making sure that UNRWA can continue to do its job, and indeed the task for which it is mandated to do and has been mandated to do since the late 1940s. Amelie.
Thanks, Farhan. A follow-up on Gaza. You said WFP has 80,000 tons of food waiting outside, enough to feed 1 million people, but enough to feed 1 million people for how long?
Obviously, for that sort of detail, you'd probably need to get some information from the World Food Program. But the idea is that when they have food supplies, they're designed to keep people fed for a period of weeks. It's not just a one-time, one-meal sort of thing. Deji, then Maggie, then Benny.
Several questions. First on the ceasefire deal. We know this deal will start on Sunday, but before Sunday, we have reports that the Israeli continued its military operation in Gaza, which killed more than 70 people. What does the Secretary General have to say on the ongoing conflict, even there's a ceasefire deal?
We are aware of these reports. I just mentioned them at the start of this briefing. At the same time, of course, what we are stressing and what the Secretary General stressed when he spoke to you yesterday is the need for all parties to fully implement this agreement. So once it comes into effect, it needs to be implemented by all.
He also reiterated the importance of implement the two-state solution, but has the Secretary General ever talked to anyone in the region or any world leaders about the post-war plan for Gaza? What would that look like?
We had been envisioning what this would be once a war ends. First, of course, we want to make sure that we get to the end of the conflict. But yes, he is in touch and will continue to be in touch, trying to draw up a plan. And of course, part of that is, as you just pointed out, something that needs to be done in conformity with the two-state solution.
I'll have some other questions in the second round.
Okay. What did I say? Maggie, Benny, then Gabriel and Michelle after that. So Maggie first.
Following up, Amelie, on the World Food Program, on the food, where outside Gaza is the food exactly? Is it already in the region, or is it further afield waiting to come? I mean, how fast, in other words,
I
could it
think
get
the
on the
idea
ground?
is I think the idea is they're bringing it into neighboring areas and they're trying to see what can be done so that once the ceasefire goes into effect, we'll try to bring it in quickly. Hopefully, we'll have some details by the start of next week, assuming, of course, that everything goes according to the agreement.
And has the UN gotten any advisories from anyone involved in the ceasefire talks about which crossings will be open and available? For instance, will Rafah be available? What will be available?
We're trying to work out those details. There's nothing we can say about that right now because the talks are ongoing. But like I said, for example, Mr. Hadi is in Cairo trying to work out some of these details.
So are those Cairo talks specifically on humanitarian aid?
Yes.
Okay.
Benny?
I have two questions. First question, yesterday, the Secretary General said, among the things that he said was Palestinian unity is essential for achieving lasting peace and stability, and I emphasize that unified Palestinian governance must remain a top priority. Does that mean that he is supporting the inclusion of Hamas in a Palestinian government?
No, what he was talking about is the idea that ultimately there needs to be unified Palestinian leadership in Gaza, the West Bank, in all the places where there are Palestinians.
People talk usually about unity government. They talk about unity between the different factions, including Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and Fatah, of course.
What we are saying is that there needs to be unity among Palestinians. How they deal with that is for the Palestinians to determine.
Okay, second question. It was reported yesterday that in a meeting with reporters, the U.S. Outgoing anti-Semitism secretary, Deborah Lipstadt, met the Secretary General in private, and that she told reporters that the Secretary General told her that Francesca Albanese is a horrible person and repeated it twice. Can you confirm or deny it, or confirm even if Deborah Lipstadt met the Secretary General?
I have no comment about the report you just cited beyond saying that, as the Secretary General has repeatedly said, that he does not make comments about the special rapporteurs who are independent experts.
Was there a private meeting between Deborah Lipstadt and the Secretary
There's nothing
General?
I can confirm on that. Where was I? Gabriel, Michelle, and then Sharife.
Thank you, Farhan. The Israeli cabinet has not approved the ceasefire deal yet. They're apparently going to be meeting on Friday. How is the delay on the Israeli side affecting the UN's planning for the implementation of the ceasefire deal?
As I just mentioned, we're continuing in our various talks. The planning is going on. And indeed, that planning has involved Israeli officials, including through Sigrid Kaag's work earlier this week.
Can you give any more detail on why the Secretary General is not going to Damascus while he's in the region?
Yeah, the basic reason is that he has to come back here. He'll be here on Monday for the Security Council meeting on the Middle East, and you'll get to hear from him then. Michelle.
Thanks, Farhan. Just a bit of a follow-up on the talks in Cairo. Presumably someone from Israel is taking part in these talks?
I think it would be up to the Egyptian officials to confirm who's over there. I mean, from our side, like I said, we have Mr. Hadi there.
And what's the UN feeling after one day of talks? Is it going to be feasible on day one of this ceasefire for 600 trucks of aid to enter Gaza?
We will have to see. Like I said, the talks that we're having are ongoing. There are many difficult issues to resolve, and we'll have to see how they go. Sharife?
Thank you, Farhan. I have a question on a different topic. I was following the U.S. Secretary of State Blinken's press briefing before coming down here, and two journalists tried to ask questions to the Secretary of State, namely Max Blumenthal and Sam Husseini. While Max was invited to leave, Sam was forced out physically, with police literally lifting him up from his arms and legs to drag him out. So I'd like to ask you, as the US depicts itself as one of the leading countries of freedom of speech and press freedom. How do you evaluate this situation, and do you have a reaction?
Well, I don't know enough about the details of this particular incident to comment in full, but obviously we expect all nations to respect the rights of all journalists. Dennis.
Yeah, a question on a different topic. Has Secretary General received an invitation to the inauguration of Mr. Trump? And if he will receive, will he go?
As Stefan made clear to you, there's no common practice for Secretaries General of the United Nations to attend U.S. inaugurations. They haven't done so before, and that's not going to happen this time. I'm not aware of any invitation being extended. Abdul Hamid online.
Thank you, Farhan. I have a couple of questions. I want to follow up with Deja's question about killing more Palestinians. It's just to correct him, it's not a conflict, but it's massacres had been committed. Yesterday, 73 Palestinians were killed, and today 28, and in Jenin 6. However, none of that appeared in your briefing. Why is that?
Well, regarding Jenin, what I can tell you is that the Secretary General remains deeply concerned about the ongoing violence in the occupied West Bank, including the Israeli airstrike on the Jenin refugee camp, which killed 6 Palestinians, including a 15-year-old. The escalating violence is heightening tensions. The Secretary General reiterates his call for all parties to exercise maximum restraint and use intentional lethal force only when it is strictly unavoidable to protect life. He further emphasizes the importance of accountability and the protection of civilians in accordance with international humanitarian law. Deji?
My second question.
Oh, okay, yeah, one more?
I
Sure.
have a few more, if you don't mind.
Okay, a
France
couple more and then
and
let's go to the
Egypt
others. Yes,
I
go.
don't know why you only limit me, you don't limit anybody except me.
No, I limited Deji before
I
you.
have 2 more questions. Okay. France and Egypt are preparing for a conference in June about the 2-state solution. And I asked before if the UN is involved in the planning and the invitation or in any form or the other. Do you have any answer to that?
I'm not aware of that. We'll have to see closer to the timing of the event whether there's a greater UN involvement. What's your last question?
My last question is about the assessment of the destruction in Gaza. Is the UN prepared to do any assessment after the ceasefire takes place?
Yes, certainly. That's one of the things we intend to do. Whenever there's a conflict, we try to assess the damage as soon as it can be and then see what is needed and how much funding is needed and what sort of activities are needed to get those areas back on their feet. And that's what we intend to do here. Deji.
A totally different topic. This week, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said, and I quote, "I can only confirm the validity of fears that Russia was planning acts of air terror, not only against Poland, but against airlines around the world." Has the UN received any information, intelligence on this possible act of terror by Russian Federation?
I'm not aware of any of that. You might want to check with the International Civil Aviation Authority organization whether they're aware of any such thing.
One last thing, it's not actually a question. We just noticed that the escalator has been fixed, connecting the ground floor to the second.
Yes, the things we do for you. Okay, last question,
Yeah,
Margaret,
but
before we go to
the escalator to the
The glass is half full either way. Margaret.
Thanks, Farhan. Just one on Sudan, please. The United States is reported to be about to put some new sanctions on Sudan related to chemical weapons use, on the SAF, I should be more specific, on saying they've used chemical weapons against the RSF on at least a couple of occasions. Does the UN have any independent information regarding that? Anything, reports from the ground?
We do not. Obviously, if there's any information that's relevant to this, it would be good for that to be brought up to the Security Council, which has been looking into the use of different armaments in the Sudan conflict. And with that, let me turn to our guest.